Hey everyone, automation platform companies ServiceNow and UiPath have seen their stock price valuations decrease in recent days. Now, some investors might be curious which one of these two is the better stock to buy. In this video, I'll answer that question. I'll compare the two on revenue, on profit margin, on cash flow. I'll look at their balance sheet, and finally, I'll weigh it all against their valuation to determine which one of these automation platform companies I think makes the better investment today. So let's take a look. I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now. All right, so starting with revenue growth. Now, looking back over the last several years, you'll notice ServiceNow has demonstrated much better revenue growth than UiPath. Its revenue has jumped to $9.478 billion, and it's a much larger company on a trailing 12-month revenue basis compared to UiPath, which generated just $1.35 billion. Typically, you'll notice that smaller companies grow faster than the larger companies. That wasn't the case in the latest quarter, where UiPath grew in the mid double digits, I should say. I believe 16% revenue growth for UiPath in the latest quarter, while ServiceNow grew its revenue by over 20% in the latest quarter. And further, ServiceNow is forecasting more than 20% revenue growth for the full fiscal year, while UiPath just recently downgraded their annual outlook, cutting actually in half their operating income outlook, and the resignation of their CEO is leading to greater difficulties for UiPath. And in fact, that report from UiPath, I think, had an impact on ServiceNow. I think it made its stock price come down a little bit as well, as investors were concerned. If things are going that poorly for UiPath, is ServiceNow going to be impacted as well? Because ServiceNow reported its latest earnings results roughly 1 month before UiPath did. And UiPath told investors that it was in the last month and a half to 2 months that it noticed its revenue, its contract signing, its difficulties with its clients and getting on board new contracts. So investors are fearing that ServiceNow, when they next report quarterly results, that they're going to have difficulties as well. They just haven't reported yet since the macroeconomic difficulties took hold. Still, longer term, these two companies will benefit from a nice tailwind in that rising labor costs are making it much more attractive to automate as many tasks as you can. And this will help businesses grow faster because they'll be more streamlined, and it'll help businesses save costs on labor because labor costs are rising so quickly. I mean, labor inflation is out of control lately, and businesses are looking for ways that they can keep up efficiency, they can keep up productivity without having to hire more individuals. And you've seen several large tech companies announce thousands and thousands of job cuts, and this is one service that can help companies cut costs while at the same time maintain productivity. And so they'll both benefit from that tailwind longer term. So the next thing I wanted to compare these two on is the cash flow from operations to sales. And in this metric, ServiceNow is much better at 40%, but UiPath has the better trend of improvement. Look at this sharp improvement from UiPath here in its cash flow from operations to sales. UiPath was one of those companies I mentioned that cut costs. They laid off people in mid to late 2022. And those job cuts, those cost cuts, are leading to improving performance in cash flow from operations and in profitability, as I will show you a little bit later. So while ServiceNow is much better in the metric at 40%, UiPath is demonstrating the better improvement as its revenue is growing, its cash flow from operations are increasing rapidly. So a similar story with comparing these two in their operating profit margin. ServiceNow, the much better margin at 10.02%, but UiPath showing the much better trend of improvement there. Sharp increases in its operating profit margin, although it's still negative 12.39%, it's improved rapidly since those job cuts, so those cost cuts it implemented in mid to late 2022. And ServiceNow, not to be understated, has done an excellent job improving its operating margins as well, from negative 20% in 2016 all the way up to 10% positive in the most recent trailing 12-month period. So they've both done an excellent job in demonstrating economies of scale, improving profitability as revenue has grown. So the next thing I wanted to compare these two is on their balance sheet. They both have solid balance sheets, with UiPath being slightly better. And I say that because UiPath has zero debt and $1.936 billion in cash. ServiceNow has $5 billion in cash, but they also have $1.488 billion in long-term debt. So UiPath's balance sheet is more clean with zero debt. ServiceNow has more cash on the balance sheet, but they're also a larger company in terms of revenue. Remember, we looked at revenue and they have almost 7 times the revenue of UiPath, but their cash balance is roughly twice as large as UiPath, and they have more debt than UiPath. So in comparing proportionally their balance sheet, UiPath's balance sheet is in much better shape, even though they both have very good balance sheets, in that ServiceNow can pay off all of its debt and it'll still have more than $3.5 billion in cash. So they both have solid balance sheets. It's just UiPath is slightly in a better position here. And lastly, I wanted to compare these two on their valuation, and I wanted to use the forward price to earnings ratio. And according to this metric, UiPath is trading at a forward price to earnings of 26.38, while ServiceNow is trading at a forward price to earnings of 40. So ServiceNow is roughly 50% more expensive than UiPath according to this metric. And while I agree ServiceNow is the better company right now, they're demonstrating slightly better revenue growth. They have better margins in terms of operating profit margin and cash flow from operations, but UiPath has the better balance sheet. Also, UiPath is going through a leadership change, which is not ideal when you're comparing two companies. Still, if I was to pick between these two, if I had to pick between these two, I would say UiPath is the better stock to buy. If I had to pick between these two, I would say UiPath is the better stock to buy. Although I will add that I have both of these stocks rated as a buy. I like ServiceNow as well. I think ServiceNow is a good value and I have it rated as a buy. I just like UiPath a little bit better than I like ServiceNow, and that's why I would pick UiPath over ServiceNow if I had to pick between these two today. Did you know that over 90% of the people that watch my channel are not subscribed? It'll really help support my channel if you hit that subscribe button. And oh, by the way, one of the benefits of being subscribed is that I take requests from subscribers more often than I do from non-subscribers. So if you prefer that benefit, please subscribe to the channel.